To me, emotional intelligence is the understanding and management of your own emotions, and then the awareness and observation of others and how you manage those two. The problem that a lot of people face, and studies show that only 36% of people can actually put accurate definitions or descriptors to their emotions. It's interesting because so many times we go to good, bad, fine, sad, happy. But once we dive into like what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, it's up to us to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do this differently.
So for the audience, well, we're well into this. Welcome to the show. We are here with Rich Bracken, right? The one and only famous speaker, amazing keynoter, coach around emotional intelligence. And you and I can geek out about EQ today. How's that?
Yes, we can. I'm so excited to talk with you. And obviously the conversation's already kicked off fantastically. So I'm looking forward to really diving in.
Right. So as you were sharing your story before, right, which is like you're in this heavy corporate life, the stress levels are high, you're thinking you're having a panic attack. Or no, you think you're having a heart attack. You get to the hospital and you realize that, or the doctor realizes and shares with you, it's not a heart attack, it's a panic attack, which is amazing at how our body, our physicality, right, will respond to that high stress or that emotion, right? So you get introduced to this book, right, which is through the doctor, which is interesting because, as you said, most doctors aren't practicing EQ. Right?
Yeah, they have the lowest, and ironically, I was working in a law firm at the time, and attorneys have the second lowest. So, which is terrifying because the two people that are in charge of our livelihood have the lowest emotional intelligence. But that's we'll dive into that later too.
Correct, and I think it's also because, like, I mean, there's so much creed or emphasis put on the academic side of things, right? You got your law degree, you understand the law, doctors, et cetera, and we might argue for doctors from an emotional intelligence standpoint, because when we look at emotional intelligence, we also now float into personality. What do we see with doctors? They're very high, what we call sort of analytical, rational, surgical type of personalities. It takes that type of personality to be able to cut you open, right? Provide the surgery and put you back together and then move on with it like nothing happens.
Right.
But you start to see that where the fall down is in their personal lives, right? Their relationships, their kids, et cetera. So I want to start with the first question with you, which is how do you define emotional intelligence? There's a lot of different sort of, like, if we were to, for the audience, say, okay, this is what emotional intelligence is. This is a definition. These are the components of emotional intelligence. What are they?
Yeah. So, and I will say that I'm a simpleton by nature. So everything that I talk about, I like keeping it basic. I like keeping it fun and basic when I talk about these things. And so to me, emotional intelligence is the understanding and management of your own emotions, and then the awareness and observation of others and how you manage those two. And I always call it, it's like a dance. Sometimes you dance by yourself, and sometimes if I was dancing, you probably think I don't have a very high emotional intelligence because I can't dance. But if you have a strong emotional intelligence, you're able to kind of glide through the day. You have this very poised poised presence throughout your entire day. Or if you're interjecting or interacting with other people, it's how you work together. It's how you dance together. It's how it's choreographed. And so if I'm paying more attention to you, if I'm aware of you and I know where you are and I know where we're all supposed to be at the same time, it's a fluid dance. But a lot of times we're so caught up in our own thing, or we're not paying attention to other people. We're not engaging socially, or we're not very aware of what's going on. And it looks a little bit more, awkward. And so when we break down what emotional intelligence is, I always keep the core four, which Dr. Travis Bradberry introduced in Emotional Intelligence 2.0, which you've got the personal competency side, which is self-awareness, the observation and understanding of your own emotions, and then self-management. And when I give keynotes to companies, I always start by saying, look, this is not going to make you completely oblivious to a bad mood or sadness or frustration, but it's also going to help you balance, get back to center quicker, because we have triggers that send us up and down the scale all day long. So having a high emotional intelligence, being aware of your emotions, and then how you react to those is really key. And then on the social side of things, you've got social awareness, which is active listening, paying attention to body posture, really diving into who's saying what and how they're saying it so you can engage better, you can ask better questions. And then relationship management is all of those things wrapped in together. And I tell my audiences, like, think about the first 5 people in your life, first 5 people that come to your head. If you rated them on a scale from 1 to 10, number one, probably none of them are 10s. And they're going to be varied on the scale, both personally and professionally. And so sometimes you just want to get somebody to a 5. I've worked with people before. I'm like, I'm never going to be good friends with them. We're never going to be pals. I just want to get it to a working collegial relationship. And that's a 5, and that's perfect.
I like the way you break that down. I talk a lot about relational management being a key component of EQ, which is how do you navigate their emotions? Because one of the things and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, is we are affected by other people. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
The audience, AFFECT, we're affected by them, right? So, what could be like, let's go back to self-awareness. So because we use these topics, right? Like you need to be self-aware. And, sometimes people will say, well, what do I need to be aware of? Like, is it my dysfunction? Is it my reaction? Is it why I feel? Is it my childhood traumas that I keep hearing about? Right. So how do we break self-awareness down for people?
Yeah. So the one thing I encourage, and I did a LinkedIn Live about this yesterday, is understanding what your emotions are at any given time. Because especially now in today's society, we're always so busy, and air quoting for those that are listening. We're so busy and we just don't stop. We're trying to keep up with our calendars. We're trying to keep up with social media. We're trying to keep up with the client demands. We're trying to keep up with marketing, all the things. And we don't take time to stop and say, what is going on with me? How am I doing? And I will say that I'm a huge Peloton fan, and I learned something during one of my classes that I've started implementing and coaching in both of my workshops, but also in my keynotes, is take time during lunch to stop for 5 minutes and say, how am I? How am I mentally? How am I emotionally? And how am I physically? And just that 5 minutes of awareness, stopping and shutting down your email and turning off all your notifications and putting your phone face down and just saying, what's going on? You can realize really quickly, and I do it at lunch and I do it at the end of the day, because we can start our day perfectly. I could be listening to Prince and having the best cup of coffee ever in the entire world and rocking my agenda for the day. And then something may happen between 6 a.m. and noon that now at noon, I'm like, why am I so lethargic? Why do I feel so sad? I feel like Wilson Phillips or Celine Dion's playing in my head right now. I'm so emotional. What's going on? If I don't stop and say, what caused that? I'm just going to go through the rest of my day saying, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. And we don't acknowledge it. And it's like an app that's open in the back of your phone, pulling on your battery. If you don't acknowledge those emotions and don't deal with them at the time, they're going to suck you dry by the end of the day. So we rush to plug our phone in when we're draining our battery. Just taking 5 minutes over lunch and 5 minutes at the end of the day will replenish your mental and emotional battery like nothing else.
You said you're a simpleton before, or you like to keep things simple, maybe a better way of describing it, right? And it's, I like what you just said there, which is if we could take a moment of presence, if we could slow down enough, if we could breathe, right? Exhale a little bit. Because most of us, when it comes down to emotional, call it management, and for the audience in quotations, the way we manage emotions is by internalizing them, and they become unexpressed, right? Yep. For the ladies, we call it backpacking, right? We just throw some stuff in the backpack, bloop, 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 deal with it later, deal with it later. There's your app analogy, right? It's just running in the backpack.
right? Tuck it back there. I'll deal with it later.
Right. And the backpack gets a little heavy sometimes, right? So we become slower, and it becomes sort of, as you use the word, lethargic. It's harder for me to move. I'm not operating with speed and pace. And for guys, what we do is we learn how to, in quotations, compartmentalize, which is not compartmentalize. We inhale emotions into our tummy. That's why you see all these guys with these big stomachs, right? And they're walking around, they're like, "Oh, look at my belly," right? And it's a lot of this emotion. I share this story a lot. My unexpressed emotion killed my father. My father dropped dead at 60 from rectal cancer.
Oh my gosh.
The most treatable cancer out of all the cancers.
Right.
He was a man that suffered tremendously with depression and panic attacks and anxiety attacks. I would physically watch it happen. And the interesting with him, because he was the one that started my company, and he was a guru when it came down to EQ and all that stuff. Very interesting. It's the shoemaker that had no shoes. Right. And it's a little bit of the other story, which is by the time he became the guru and figured it out, it was a little too late. Like the unexpressed emotion and the stress had built up. And it was about 5 years that they missed the diagnosis or didn't get diagnosed. And by the time they diagnosed him, it spread. But if you ask me the core truth to it, and my mother said this, the greatest gift your father ever gave you was his passing. And that meant to say you are emotionally the same human being. And if you don't practice one which you preach and teach and coach, you're going to end up following the same track. So this is an important topic. I mean, we might argue that EQ is way more important than IQ.
100%.
Right?
100%.
My ability to navigate the world and stress. And I think that's where emotional intelligence, and let's actually define that more. Emotional intelligence is understanding all of this. What we do with it is the management, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some good practices for managing? So taking pause throughout the day, and at the end of the day, some reflection, some presence. Mm-hmm. What if I have been building this stuff up? What if I've been carrying this stuff for a while? How do I process through that? What would be some things you would recommend?
Yeah, I think, and first let me acknowledge the passing of your father. I'm so sorry to hear that. But at the same time, I love what your mother said in the sense of learning from that, taking the passing as a gift and figuring out what to do with it moving forward. So my sincere apologies and condolences, but obviously we're sitting here having this conversation because you did take that advice.
Right.
When it comes to how we manage our emotions, I always talk about, first of all, if you've compartmentalized or you've backpacked long enough, you need to sit down and just explore your emotions. And the problem that a lot of people face, and the studies show that only 36% of people can actually put accurate definitions or descriptors to their emotions. So if we don't, and it's interesting because so many times we go to good, bad, fine, sad, happy. But if we explore what our emotional vocabulary is, if we, go look at thesaurus.com and put sad and look at all of the synonyms and all the different things that explore the depth of sadness or the depth of happiness. Because emotional intelligence is also not about managing your sadness or your depression or your anxiety. It's also managing your positive emotions too. And I laugh all the time when I have my audience raise their hands. I'm like, who's made an impulse purchase on Amazon because they were in a really good mood? Yeah, guilty as charged. But when we think about managing our emotions, it's understanding, okay, what am I doing? And so then that reflection time, and I'll give a perfect example where during one of my 10 years at a law firm, I had a guy that was the most condescending jerk, and I had to have a meeting with him every single week on Thursday at 11 a.m. I will never forget that because he brought so much negativity and so much anger and frustration and just didn't respect people. And so it was anxiety inducing. And this was a separate law firm than the first one. And so I didn't realize, it's because I would sit in my office at lunch on Wednesday and I would look at the next 24 hours and figure out like, what do I need to do? How do I need to prep? And I knew the meeting was sitting there, but I would see it on the calendar and that would be my trigger. From that point forward, from 11 o'clock, 11:30 on Wednesday till at least 7 o'clock on Thursday night. So over 24 hours, I'm terrible at math, so I'm not going to try to guess what that number is, but for a day and a half at least, I was stressed out and anxious because of this one person. And I didn't realize that was what was happening. Because, a lot of times when we don't acknowledge those triggers, we don't acknowledge what's setting those emotions in play, we don't acknowledge how we can do them differently. And so at one point, I just decided I'm going to block some time. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to just dive in and let whatever emotions come to the surface. And then I'm going to say, okay, acknowledge it, put a name to it, but understand why. And that anxiety came floating to the surface as if it were a balloon being held down underwater and somebody let it go. It came shooting to the surface. And I said, why do I feel this way? And I could pinpoint it back to this guy's behavior. And it made me think I'm less than, I'm insignificant, I am not worthy. And that made me upset because I knew I was. But it wasn't until I put that in words and I wrote it down and I stared at it and I was like, okay, how do I do this differently? Because I'm letting this guy take my mental real estate for a day and a half every single week. And this is unacceptable anymore. So I started going into the meeting differently and I started looking at it differently. I would look at that meeting on Wednesday, see it on Thursday and say, no, I'm going to go in and have a good time with that one. And I would just control my emotions and I would dictate the narrative. I would set the tone for the meeting out of the gate. And yes, he probably hated me more because I was the most polite, energetic, smiley son of a bitch he's ever seen. But it helped me take my control back. So once we dive into like what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, it's up to us to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do this differently.
You mentioned the word. So first, let me just come back. So in my world, what we call that is a parent-child interaction. So the way
Mm-hmm.
what we call a parental personality, and the way he
Mm-hmm.
was speaking to you was like a child.
Right.
And what we're affected at an unconscious level. And I love what you just described is go and sit down and explore those child emotions, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why am I feeling? Where is this coming from? Blah, 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 blah. And then the very simple question, which we also talk a lot about in my world, which is, what do I want?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want?
Right.
What do I want out of this meeting? What do I want in this interaction? What do I
Mm-hmm.
want to show up as, right? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
do I think? How do I approach this? And there's that wonderful saying that says, "Do unto others as you want done to yourself."
Right.
I think we need to make that more real, which is you need to manage the interaction in order to
Mm-hmm.
generate the outcome and the result that you want, right?
Right.
So good for you. I
Yeah.
wanted to
And I
come.
think that parental relationship, I love that because I think when I dove into that, it brought up some childhood feelings of
Mhm,
not feel like my father, God love him, like he tried his best, but he would always correct me on everything, and nothing was ever good enough.
mhm.
And so that parental conversation, that parental dynamic of feeling
Correct,
insignificant triggered all of these childhood emotions that made me feel that way. And
correct.
it just opened up all this, but at the same time, it also helped me realize my self-worth. And I think we don't spend enough time in that. We don't spend enough time in our confidence. We don't spend enough time in our self-belief. We're too worried about what other people think. We're too worried about the likes and the comments and the support and the followers and all these things. And at the end of the day, you're never going to make somebody act and feel and respond the way you want them to. All you
Correct.
can do is control what you do and what you feel. And if they don't react that way, that's on them. But you can't make anybody respect you. You can't make anybody be nice to you,
Yeah.
but you can definitely control how they make you feel.
Yeah, it's funny that you said you can't make people respect you because considering in 2023, 2024, the generation out there is almost demanding it. So
Right.
I wanted to come back to the word trigger because back to this, and
Mm-hmm.
the word trigger today is being overused and misused. Everyone's
Yep.
triggered. This triggers me. This triggers me. This triggers me.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to define this a little more. What is a trigger,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how do people sort of um, yeah, what is a trigger?
Yeah. Great minds think alike because I say the same thing in my presentation. I have like a slide dedicated to that. I just have like the word trigger and it's got like a left-hand turn signal
Mhm.
because what it is a stimulus of some sort. It could be a sound, an email, a person, a smell, anything that changes the dynamic of your mood and your emotion. And it can be positive or negative. It could be, again, I always go back to the fact that this is not always like what makes us sad or angry. And to your point, the idea of being triggered has this negative connotation. But at the same time, like I can listen to Baby I'm a Star by Prince and I'm triggered to be in a great mood. So
Yeah.
that's my trigger. But it's also understanding, okay, if this person, going back to the example of the guy that stressed me out, that was a trigger for me. Seeing that meeting on the calendar, not even seeing the guy, but
Mm.
seeing the meeting on the calendar, on my Outlook calendar, triggered me in a negative way. And so once I realized that that was creating a negative trigger, it was on me to say, okay, when I look at that meeting on the calendar, because I know I'm going to do it once a week, every week,
Mhm.
how do I want to respond? How do I want to do this? How do I want to manage this? And so I would look at it and go, I like a challenge. And so, going back to the visualization of what I want that meeting to be, to me, it was a challenge. I just wanted to come out of there in one piece most
Mhm.
days. I wasn't going in there to make him my best friend. I wasn't going in there to change his mind about anything. But to me, it's understanding what sends you what way. And then do you want to continue that path or do you want to change the behavior? Because a lot of times triggers are just going to happen to us. And whether or not we acknowledge them, our emotions are off in that direction. But when we
Mhm.
slow down, when we acknowledge, when we take time to really invest in ourselves and figure out what's going on, we can dictate the feeling, the emotion, and the path and the behavior.
Is emotional intelligence or emotional management learned or practiced?
I think it's both, to be honest. I think you can learn because I think sometimes we either by learning and seeing how we grow up or what our social stimulus are or who's acting in what way, we assume this is how you handle these things. And that's why you hear about people with cycles in their family and well, my dad did this or my mom did this. And so I did that. And it's just this cycle that we fall into. So I think you can learn a different management style. I think you can learn those things. Now, learning it is one thing. So it's great to say, you know what? My dad did this. This is how he reacted. I acknowledge that, and I do not want to do that again. I can acknowledge it, but what I do with it is the practice that we have to put in place. It's like love. You can't feel love or say I love this person without actually practicing it. And if we're not engaging that and we're not showing that every single day, it's knowledge without action, which is it's nice, but it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna say EQ is like yoga. You never finish learning it. You just always
never.
You always
Never.
practice it, right? And that's what people that practice yoga say. They don't say I do yoga. They say
Right.
I practice yoga, right? Or I
Yeah.
practice breath work and breath, and I practice being present.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
for the audience, I think we got I love what you said earlier, which was around the whole thought of responsibility. Be aware of it, take responsibility, and then really start to put some things in place to manage it effectively. Because we do have domain over ourselves,
Oh,
even though
absolutely.
people influence us and affect us, and we are stimulated by these different events. We do have domain over
Right.
how we respond. I
Yeah,
want to
and
come
I
back
think
to
that the one thing too, and I'll go back to one point that I missed on what emotional intelligence is that for the audience to know, like your IQ peaks out, I think it's around 15. So your IQ hits a ceiling, and you can't improve your IQ. And we talked about how EQ is bigger and better than IQ. Your emotional intelligence can be improved. So if you're listening right now and you have a low emotional intelligence, good news, you could fix that. And so when you talk about domain or having control over what we do, we truly have the ability to flex. Our emotional intelligence is malleable. You can improve it if you want to. And it's good. And I talk about this ad nauseum, and I'm sure you probably agree with this. I talk about this stuff all day, every day. Do I have emotionally intelligent days every day? Absolutely not. There are days where I haven't slept well, or I haven't eaten well, or I've got a lot of things in my mind, or my kids just won't put their shoes on to get out the door. Those kinds of things will fluctuate my own emotional intelligence. Now, the more I practice it, the more I actually behave in a way that is emotionally intelligent, or stop myself and redirect my emotions or my management of it, I can become more emotionally intelligent. And it's putting that into practice, as we talked about, that helps me. Okay, it's like rehearsing, or you mentioned yoga. Do I do tree pose perfectly every time? First time, no. But the more I do it, the more I practice it, the more I try and learn what works and what doesn't for me, then absolutely I can get great at it.
Very true. Very true. I like what I was thinking as you said. We cap out at a certain IQ level, but we could all continue to develop and grow and get better and more malleable and fluid within EQ. So you could be a real dumb idiot, but you could be really, really good with people, right?
Oh, give me an idiot with emotional intelligence over a brilliant person with none. I'll take that all day long.
Right, exactly. And in fact, you see this in leadership today. I think, it's been spoken about for the last decade plus, which is EQ in leadership. But today, specifically after the pandemic, EQ is one of the most fundamental or foundational skills, tools leaders can have, because we are not only navigating everyone else's emotions, and today we are getting highly emotional people, right? Emotions have been sort of, inflated tremendously, which is a whole nother conversation we could get into, but the ability to navigate their own stress, right?
Right.
This was your story. You're in a senior position, you're in a firm, you think you have a heart attack one day, you beeline to a hospital, right? That was because of the mismanagements of the emotions and the stress. I often say stress is good for people, right? Stress will get you to move.
Stress. I think when managed appropriately, it's like any other emotion too. When managed appropriately, it could work in your favor and could be a great motivator when need be. Like I will tell you, you put a last minute project on my desk, like I'll figure it out. But I'm gonna be stressed. But that stress gives me that pump, that boost of energy to get it done. And I love what you said too about how companies, and I say this all the time too, is that companies will never, ever invest in something that has a higher ROI than emotional intelligence training. And you talk about leadership. If you have a corporation and you've got emotionally intelligent leaders all over the board, your company, the view of your company is determined by the emotional intelligence of your leaders to a level of about 72%. So nobody ever says like, yeah, they're all really smart, but they're all jerks. Like, I mean, if you go in and say, yeah, I really like this organization. They really care about their people. They want people to grow. They want to see people, successful. Even in downtimes, they have a positive outlook on things. That's where people want to go. So when you think about retention, people
Mhm.
want to stay somewhere that has emotionally intelligent leaders. If you have, dictators running your organization, plan on some attrition. That's going to happen. But from a burnout standpoint too, your leaders are under a high level of demands. Your employees and your staff are under high levels of stress. And if you're
Right.
not investing in them and giving them the grace and the bandwidth to be emotionally intelligent and put it in practice, as we've talked about, you're going to have burnout. You're going to have sick days because people are going to be stressed out. The best thing that I saw, it was a couple months ago, is that somebody asked out loud I think it was on LinkedIn, that said, why is it that if I have a little bit of a cold, I have no problem calling in and my company has no problem saying, yeah, stay home, that's fine. But if I have a mental health day, if I'm not feeling at the top of my game, if I'm struggling, if I were to call them and say, hey, I'm having a mental health struggle day, I need to stay home today, what do you think they would say?
Well, if it was me, I'd roll my eyes and be like, get the fuck up and get the hell on with it, right? But I know I'm joking,
Right.
right? They would roll their eyes. They wouldn't take it as seriously as physical health,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
That being said, I think in today's world, right, mental health is taken as seriously as physical health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have evolved in that, but there is. So let's go there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a loaded question.
Sure.
Is some of the mental health challenges that we're dealing with today more to do with people not having emotional intelligence?
That's a great question.
Right. Like, in other words, if we beefed up on that EQ,
mm-hmm.
have would we have better mental health?
I have to say yes on the front end of this because of a couple different things, and I'm going to be pantomiming here a little bit. So those of you that are listening, I apologize. I'm doing a lot of air gestures here. So if you've got, let's take an employee at a company.
Mm-hmm.
If they work at a company that is emotionally intelligent, and I have worked with those that are incredibly emotionally intelligent, they have the psychological safety of saying, yeah, I need to take a day and I need to get right with myself. Maybe that, we think about like the sandwich generation. I'm square in that. I've got two parents that are very sick, and the other shoe's going to drop at some point. Does that wear on my mental capacity? Absolutely, it does. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, we're all carrying something around. So if we are emotionally intelligent enough as leaders to say, look, I know Rich and I know Greg backwards and forwards, I know that they are in it. I know that they are high performing individuals. And if they're having an off day and they're going to come to work at 10% capacity because they're so focused on this other thing that's weighing on them mentally, is it better for me as a leader to say, you know what, Greg, take a day. I know you're going to come back stronger tomorrow. You do what you got to do. That is where we have the safety of saying something and the safety of raising the issue. Now, is it going to happen? I think there are those people that will say, well, I'm not just going to give people days off because they don't feel, maybe they're tired or sad. I'm not going to give people
Stressed.
days off because they're sad. But at the same time, you'd be shocked. It's almost like unlimited PTO days. I have yet to come across a company that has an unlimited PTO policy that says, yeah, across the board, people are abusing the crap out of this. If you have it, you're not going to abuse it. And, yes, you're going to have, law of averages, you're going to have some bad actors here and there. I'll just say that. But if you have emotionally intelligent leaders and you're encouraging emotional intelligence within your organization, you also raise things like client service, client experience. You're more empathetic to the needs of your clients or your audience or your prospects. So, just to say that it's one-to-one interactions is limiting the scope of benefit of the emotional intelligent leader or organization on their marketplace, on their staff and employees, on their brand. Think about all the companies that have run into emotionally intelligent problems where they're not paying attention. They're not reading the signs of the marketplace. They're not doing the right things. And or maybe putting out a tone deaf message, or maybe they're not, I've also as a client or as a patron have run into organizations that are not emotionally intelligent because they just don't care. They've got your money. They do not care. They're moving on. If you want to be mad, be mad. We don't care. So there are those things that from an impact standpoint, emotional intelligence has a variety. And this is, again, I'm like heavy into the pantomiming here. There is a massive landscape of benefit for organizations to invest in emotional intelligence. And most times kind of like using the word trigger as a negative only. No, when we say engaging people where they are and giving people the grace and the psychological safety to speak up, that has a whole big variety of benefits that can happen, not just employee to leader, but also company to audience. There's a tremendous, and we can do a whole nother episode on this, but there's a ton of benefits.
We totally agree. I want to come back to something you said earlier. Was it 36% of people can actually describe their emotions, like in more of a detailed way? It's only 36%.
Yeah, right? Only 36%.
Why is that? I mean, what do you think contributes to that?
I think it's the lack of self-actualization. I don't think many people really dive into their emotions. And we talked about it earlier about compartmentalizing and backpacking. We tend to just tuck things away because we don't want to deal with them. We tuck things away because we don't want to face the truth of what it is. And going back to my example about the attorney and the parental relationship there, I was frustrated and I was mad on the surface. But when I dug into it, I was actually embarrassed. I felt insignificant. But up here, I'm happy, frustrated, sad. But down below, there's a depth of emotions that were triggering or that were being triggered through this interaction. But it wasn't until I stopped and said, okay, what in the hell is going on with me? And why is this having such a profound impact? It's one thing, like if somebody makes you mad, you're like, F them and move on with it. But this person literally had a chokehold on my emotions every single week because I allowed him to.
Right.
And so it was also the realization of like, somebody, you hear people say it all the time, they make me so mad. No, they don't. They're doing something that you're choosing to be mad about.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. And so backing into myself and doing the self-actualization and really understanding what was going on made me realize, because on the surface, it's easy to say like, he's a jerk, he makes me mad. I'm like, well, actually, this really brings up a whole lot of things where I hated to play golf for a while because my dad would critique every shot I hit.
Right. It's, I'm so glad you said that. No one makes you feel anything. You feel, right? And there might be other people or an environment or a situation, which is, as it's the trigger event from what we call it. But what you've just described is the iceberg. On the surface, we see sort of the I'm angry, frustrated. On the depth of this, I'm embarrassed. I'm treated like a child. I'm made to feel insecure that I'm a second-class citizen. And that's what's so disruptive to me right now. Because I could get past being angry pretty quickly, right? Yeah. In fact, there are four scientific, well, I think research is a better word, ways of managing your anger. The number one way of managing anger is delay. Can you give enough time and space between what you want to do and react versus can you give some space between what you want to do versus reacting in the moment? Right.
Oh, absolutely. And it could be a 3-second breath, or it could be, you know what, give me a little bit of time to think about this and walking away from a situation.
Yeah. What's shown is 12 minutes. So
interesting.
Delay for 12 minutes. And it doesn't mean that the feelings go away, but what we start to get back more is the rationality.
Right.
Because in the moment, we're just pure primal reactive, right? You just want to kill this guy across the table. Right. All right, let me back off for a little bit. Let me go sit down. And then you get into the self-examination, actualization, the awareness, and you start to recognize the iceberg, huh? This is what's bugging me, right? Reminds me of my father. And the joke with emotional intelligence is, it might be as simple as that. This reminds me of my father. This reminds me of my mother, right?
Yeah. Well, and two, I think, when we think about controlling and really being, having domain, as you mentioned earlier, over our emotions, if you think about this analogy, would you rather, and think about like all the people that you're connected with on social media, the people you come in contact with in public, your friends, your family, thousands of people. Would you rather give the keys to your happiness to whomever of the thousands that they could just do and say whatever they want, make you feel however you want, and you were just caught in the spiral of who decides what? Or do you want to be the sole contributor and controller of how you feel. Because again, like we said, I could go to Target later on and somebody could cut me off in the parking lot. And if I let them control my emotions for the rest of the day, I will literally just handed the keys to my mental car to that person and they're taking me wherever they want to go. But if I said, maybe they were paying attention, maybe they had a bad day, maybe somebody passed away and they're coming to buy us a condolences card. I don't know. But if I take control over that situation and I take control over my emotions in that matter, I'm in a much better place than just throwing it to the whims of somebody else.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And we give up our power to other people, right? When we use statements like "you make me feel." One of the things I teach is something called "I am feeling."
Okay.
Right?
I like this already.
Yeah. So for all the individuals that, they start to describe their scenarios, and this person did this, and they made me feel this way. And, this was the perception that they left me with. It's the exact thing. You're giving your keys to the car, right? And we got to one of the ways of having more domain and awareness of that emotions is by taking more of the "I am feeling" position. Because I could take responsibility. I could control. I could have domain over me. I'm powerless when I say "you make me feel." Right. I could be like, look, I'm in this meeting with this guy. Fuck, I am feeling frustrated with him. Oh, not he drives me up the wall. Oh, I am so irritated with this conversation. And now this gives us a little bit of like, okay, what do I want to do with it? Right. So I move from a place of being powerless to a place of power. The other thing that I think back to the managing the anger is the four ways. First is delay. So can I create some space? Second is distraction. It's interesting. And I'm sure you know this, the brain can really only think of one thing at a time. Now, I guess we have racing thoughts, right? But if I'm really angry, right, I'm like, by the way, that art on your wall, like, where did it come from? You get distracted. You start to explain. Now the brain's into a different place, right? The third is what we call incompatibility. So I use this analogy a lot. Do you like dogs? Are you a dog lover?
I am a dog lover, even though I don't have one. I love dogs.
Okay, so if I stuck a puppy in your hand when you were really frustrated, right? This thing that you're holding, it's soft, it smells like a puppy, it's cute, it's jumping all over you. You're like, oh, I can't be angry anymore. The thing that's in my arms and jumping all over and licking my face right now, I just can't be angry, right? And the third or the fourth is a little bit what you were talking about before, which is, can we take some time to go and relax and restore? Can we back off a little bit and process? I wanted to ask you about the concept of debriefing, which for the audience, debriefing is basically emotionally vomiting. People get to go and exhaust all the stuff, right? And we try to do this with our spouses and friends. We come home, we're like, oh, I got to tell you about my day, blah, blah, blah. Right. And the spouse and the friend sort of cuts us off or judges us and all that stuff. But, how important is it for people to emotionally exhaust this stuff? And can we do that by ourselves in like a journaling exercise? Is it better to do it with people? Should I go see a therapist? Should I come and meet you as my coach? What should we do to exhaust?
Yes, all those things. I think, and everybody's got their own specific routes, and depending on the weight of what you're carrying around, you're going to need different kinds of help. So let's unpack it a little bit. So and you mentioned the backpacking earlier. The analogy that I paint, or the metaphor, I always get an analogy and metaphor mixed up. I wasn't stellar in English. My English teachers are probably cringing if you're listening to this. If you're walking through a hall and that hall is your day, and you've got your arms outstretched, again, sorry for the listeners, I'm doing more pantomiming, but if you've got your arms stretched out as if you're holding boards walking to some place, right? So you've got your arms outstretched and you're walking through this hallway and people are continually stacking books on your arms. And they're saying, carry this to the end of the hall. And you're carrying and you're carrying and you're carrying. And the books are stacking higher and higher and higher. At some point, your arms are going to give way. And that's why debriefing is so critical. And there are times where, I will go to the extreme. I think everybody should go see a counselor once in their life. I don't care what you've got going on. I don't care how good or bad your life is. Go see a professional counselor once in your life. It will change your thought process on you and how you view how you manage your emotions. So to me, that's almost like it should be as like a rite of passage. Like that should happen. Now, I feel like we kind of coming down the severity lane, if you've got trusted advisors, good friends, colleagues, family members, significant other, if you feel that you've got this really tight inner circle that like I can think on my, right away, I could think of half a dozen people that I know I could call at any point, any time of day with any problem, and they would listen and they would support me and they would advise me as best possible. If you have that, that's fantastic. Now, there are times where maybe you can't count on somebody being available. And so is there a way that you can self-debrief? 100%. When you were talking about delay and distraction, I think about when I get really upset, I either go for a walk, I'll go work out, I'll go listen to music, or I'll go for a drive. And for those of you that live around me, I don't drive that angry, so don't worry about it. But I'm not out road raging. I will be listening to heavy metal in my car. You will probably see me headbanging at the red light. That's as extreme as it gets. But the bottom line is that I know that I have those self options, that I know if I get upset about something or I get frustrated about something, and it gets to a point where I'm sitting in my office and all of a sudden I'm like, God, I can't focus on anything. I'm so frustrated. I get up. And I'll either watch like one of my favorite bands on YouTube. I'll watch like a 3-minute video about them, concert video, whatever. I'll go for a walk, or I'll go downstairs and lift for a couple of minutes. I used to have one of those water weighted punching bags, which was phenomenal. I need to get a new one. But if you have those things,
too much.
Right? If you have those things to be able to go to at any time, because you're not relying on other people to help you out, that's phenomenal. And it's not, and there are times where, and I will sound crazy as I paint this picture, there have been times where I will put my earbuds in, I will listen to one of my favorite heavy metal bands, and I will just work out like crazy and not talk to myself, but inside, I am marinating on what's going on. I am debriefing. I'm like, what is going on? Why do I feel this way? What are the triggers? Why is it causing this? What is the underlying reason? And what am I going to do about it? Because we can analyze all those things. But if we don't put some action and next steps behind it, we're just going to sit in that emotion as if we're just marinating in a sauce. And that's not good.
For the audience, what Rich just said, and I'll paraphrase, if you don't do something about this, your whole exercise of working out and debriefing and breathing and delaying and examining and becoming aware was just a waste of time. Because if you 100%. Go through all of that effort, at the end of that, you now want to think about, what do I now do next? Right. Mm-hmm. And part of that is, how do I handle this moving forward? What do I want to show up as? Once again, I have control over that. And how do I take responsibility for all of these things? Because people don't make you feel anything, right? Even the other driver on the road, you just happen to be a little annoyed and frustrated.
Yes. If you see me at a red light headbanging and it scares you, like, figure out what you're going to do next.
That's amazing. So, man, I can't believe we're coming to the top of the hour. This was an awesome conversation about EQ and emotional management and stuff. Last question, and then we move to the better human question. So 2 more questions, actually. But just before we go there, let's drop all your links and information for the audience. Where can people come and follow you? What are your platforms? What's your website? If they wanted to get more info and coaching from you, how do they find out?
Yeah, the hub of everything is richbracken.com. Videos, my coaching information, my keynote information is all on that website. You can also find, I'm mostly active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you want to find me on there, those are my 2 biggest platforms. And then I will say, as a former national touring DJ, I am very, very proud of my Spotify. I have some of the best playlists for every single mood and genre that you could possibly imagine, except for country music.
You were a pro DJ?
Yeah, so I toured, I played in England. I played in a lot of the bigger cities in the States. Played some big festivals. Got to open for groups or artists like the late great Avicii, Kelly Rowland, Gloria Gaynor, Roger Sanchez, like some phenomenal artists. So yeah, I spent 25 years as a national touring DJ, which is now coming back in the shape of a keynote too. So I'm reintroducing that. I took a 7-year hiatus, and I'm back and better than ever.
That's amazing. That's a whole nother episode we got to get into, which is
absolutely,
like touring DJ to then keynote speaker.
Yep.
That's awesome. And I'm connected with you on Instagram. I just added you on LinkedIn as well. I checked out Rich's website. It's a very cool website, by the way. So if you are interested things like keynotes and coaching and stuff.
Mhm.
I liked your website. Really clear,
Thank
really
you.
simple. It's told me exactly how to get in touch with you.
Perfect.
All right. So two more questions.
Yes.
How important is assertiveness for emotional intelligence or emotional management? My ability to assert and set limits and manage more difficult situations.
Oh, it is critical. And I do a lot of work with media and the news as well. And I did a segment on this about setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries. And so many times we are terrible, especially as adults, at setting and keeping boundaries because we are people pleasers. We don't want people to take it the wrong way. We don't want to offend anybody. So we just let people walk all over what I call our mental and emotional lawn. And we don't put up that fence and say, hey, look, no, like you're good there. Don't come here because I understand that you're going to just trash my lawn, trash my house. Don't do it. And so oftentimes we need to dive into who is it, what are they doing, and what is the behavior that's causing it? Because again, like kind of going back to the they make me mad thing. Well, if you're not setting boundaries with somebody and they're like, this person just takes advantage of me all the time, you're letting them. You can say, like, my favorite thing is no is a complete sentence. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain yourself. If you don't want to do something, or if something doesn't feel right, or if somebody asks you to do something, just say, hey, no, I can't. Just set that boundary. So you have to be assertive about your boundaries because again, let's go I'm going to call it the analogy metaphor scenario because I don't know which one's which. But if you were holding $1 million and people just walked up and just took it out of your hands, would you let them? No, you would not let them. You would actually protect it and give it to the right people. So it's the same thing with our emotions. If you just let people take from your emotions, and you're going to be depleted. And so if people are just walking up and taking that cash out of your hand, when it comes time to give the emotion or give the money to the person that you want to invest in the people that you care about, you're not going to have it. So take the assertive stance of saying, like, these are my boundaries. These are my non-negotiables. This is what I need to be successful. And most people are like, well, that sounds so selfish. Oh, it kind of should be, because nobody else is in charge of taking care of you but you. So it's up to you to set that boundary. It's up to you to be assertive, and it's up to you to declare what's okay and what's not.
Yeah, what you just described was the balance between self-orientation and others orientation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, where is that line? I love your analogy or metaphor, whatever it is, about the bank, right?
I'm gonna go Google the definitions after this. I feel so stupid right now. Thank God I have a high EQ because my IQ is suffering.
Correct. But you know what? We're way more employable and
Right.
successful as EQs, not IQs. So I love the analogy of it, or maybe metaphor, which is the emotional bank. Sometimes we need to deposit into our emotional bank and save. Yep. And sometimes we need to withdraw, but there's that constant, like, I'm always depositing into my emotional bank. So I've got funding and resource. And when I do want to withdraw, I've got the resources to do so. Awesome, right. Awesome example. All right. Final question, the most important question of the episode, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
The first word that jumps into my head is kindness. And I think kindness is wrapped with empathy, is wrapped with listening. And I think it's maybe engagement is the better word. I think we need to engage differently. And I think what that means is it's part of social awareness too. It's listening to understand, asking deeper questions, understand. And it's not that you have to agree with everybody. I can tell you that I've asked deeper questions and gotten to know somebody that I'm like, all right, game over. Like, good game. I don't agree with you at all, but now I understand where you're coming from and I can manage our relationship better. And so understanding, because we take things so surface level. We're so worried about the impressions and all of the things. And we don't ask, tell me more about that. Tell me more about this. Tell me more about why you feel that way. And so if we engage deeper, we can understand better. And when we understand each other better, we're kinder to each other. Again, like, I don't necessarily have to love everybody that I come in contact with, but if I care about them, even on a very high level, I'm going to be kind to them. And now, again, it goes back to boundaries. You want to make sure that you're setting the right boundaries with things, but I think we just all need to care a little bit deeper, 1% deeper, and that can change the game on your relationships. It can change the game on your happiness.
Amazing. I totally agree with you. That's awesome. Well, my friend, I think we're going to have to set up a part 2, but we'll rap about that and chat about that a little bit afterward. To the audience, I hope you got a ton out of this. The whole concept of emotional intelligence, what it is, how it works, some things I could practice. And the key word was practice, practice, practice.
Mhm.
What contributes to it, how we can have domain. We need to take control of our emotions, take that power. So to the audience, I really, really hope you all walk out of this episode a little more emotionally intelligent with some things to practice. And if you need any more resource, reach out to Rich or reach out to myself, and we'll be happy to help you out. To the audience, stay happy, stay healthy. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, and we will see you next week.